Can you write off a G-Wagon through your business? This is Mario Santiago and Wes Lyon. Let's take a dive into this one, Wes. We're on social media searching for good or bad tax advice, and we found this one of, hey, everybody's saying that you can write off a G-Wagon or a Range Rover or some very nice car through your business. Is this necessarily true, Wes?
Actually, yes. Now, we need to follow the rules, but actually, yes, you can now. This is, price of cars have gotten outrageous, so I got a good laugh. 100% bonus depreciation is back, meaning, technically speaking, yes, you can do this, and if you structure it the way we tell you to and follow the rules, this is doable. But you also want a reasonableness on the vehicle you're purchasing. I got a good laugh. 100% bonus depreciation has not been around for a few years. It was getting phased out. Now it's back. Had another CPA call me and go, hey, are we doing Range Rovers? And I was like, well, I don't know why we wouldn't be. Well, why do you ask? And he's like, you look up how much they cost. And I looked it up. I was like, oh, these are no longer $100,000 vehicles. These are getting up to like the higher end $250,000 vehicles. And, we kind of came to the conclusion. We've been writing them off for 30 years, so just because they've inflated through the roof, I guess we're still doing it. But you can indeed write off the cost of a vehicle through your business if you meet the requirements, right? That's the big if. So it needs to be used more than 50% for business use. That's the first thing in order to qualify for the 100% bonus depreciation. The second thing is we've got to follow the rules. Some of this is on the CPA, some of it is on you. So 50% business use. Mario, how do we track that?
Well, a lot of people forget that the business mileage that you have to track, you driving to your dental practice isn't considered business mileage. That's actually considered personal mileage. So big mistake we see is somebody claiming 100% business use, but they practice 30 miles from their home. All right off the bat, the IRS is going to look at that and say, okay, you have 60 personal miles per day, 5 days a week. There's no way this is a 100% business use vehicle. So you need to prove that you have business mileage outside of your commute. And that's really how you make this legitimate.
And a lot of people get tripped up on that one. They say, well, I only live 2 miles from my office. I say, that's a good thing.
Yeah.
We've seen all the tricks. Oh, well, I drive from my house to the post office in the morning or to the bank in the morning, and then I drive by the post office at night. No, that's not it. Your commute is your commute. The IRS is pretty strict on that. However, anything outside of that, if I drive to CE, if I am driving to the bank and coming back, your mileage to the bank will work. If I'm driving to pick up supplies, if I'm driving to meet referring doctors, all of these things, yes, indeed, can count. So the shorter your commute, the better. Now, what you need to be aware of is the IRS, the first thing they're going to do is ask for a mileage log. So we better have one.
Yeah, and you can either manually do it. Wes, I think you use MileIQ, which is an app where you can swipe left for personal, swipe right for business. So there's different ways to track it, right?
Yes, and you need to have a good estimate of your mileage. Now, they are no longer auditing on the contemporaneous rule, meaning you had to have exact details, but you need to have a good idea of your mileage log and how you got there. So the first thing they're going to do, though, if they're auditing your mileage log is, first, do you have one?
Yeah.
Don't have one, well, now we're toast. Now we do have one though. Okay, now they're going to test it for reasonableness, and they're just going to calculate your commute. And they're going to say, hey, look, your commute is this many, your website says you're open 4 days a week. So I calculated this much business use and you calculated half of that. And they're not necessarily looking at the percentage, they're just looking at the miles. Hey, if it was 30 miles each way, I need to see 60 miles a day because I know you're commuting. Well, if you don't have that 60 miles a day accounted for, you're in hot water. Now, the next thing that has to happen, let's say we do this, we end up at 75% business use, and generally, you're shooting for like 72.49, so it looks like you actually did a mileage log, and you can just make up a number. Now, we need to add back your personal use as income to your tax return. So what we're actually going to do is go into the IRS, I think it's called actual lease value table, But the IRS, I might be a little bit off the top of my head on what that table is called. But there is actually a table based off the value of your vehicle. It gets assigned a lease value. So that lease value multiplied by your personal use percentage needs to get added to your W-2 as income, right? And that is you signaling to them that, hey, I do indeed use this vehicle somewhat personally. And because of that, I'm paying tax on the portion of this that needs to be personal use. That's going to be how to kind of avoid the audit, avoid the scrutiny. If you don't add that and you had personal mileage, well, you're somewhat in trouble here.
Do you need to log every single trip you take all year, Wes?
No, generally we're going to look for like 1 to 3 months, but we're going to want a really good estimate. So I get Mile IQ, and then I like to pick a month in which we're traveling somewhere.
Yeah.
So, we're going to the Hinman, probably use this month, go down to Atlanta, perfectly legitimate. And, for me especially, I travel all the time in my car, so it's not really that big of a stretch. But you've got to have it accounted for on what a typical month looks like and how you came to this, and it's got to be reasonable. So that's where sometimes clients with super long commutes, it's like, well, this might not work. What's your spouse up to in the business? And can we potentially write your spouse's vehicle off a little bit easier than we can write yours because, his or her main location is the home. Or some of you may be car guys like me, and you've got an extra car sitting at home. So, I did not write off my truck. I wrote off a different vehicle. And when they ask me about that, I'm like, well, you want me to pull up the camera footage of my truck pulling in here every day? Because that is the vehicle that gets commuted in. It's my truck. I can prove that my truck gets a lot of miles each year put onto it. Now I've got this other vehicle, and don't buy a third vehicle just for a tax write-off. It's more of if you happen to be a car person and you have an extra vehicle laying around, really does help you out on, hey, this is my commuter vehicle. We put a ton of miles on it. It's just, we don't want to have to replace the business vehicle every 3 years because we're driving 20,000, 30,000 miles a year.
Yeah.
So it makes it a little bit easier to do. Now, if you do this as well, you got to write all the expenses off through this. I kind of found this one entertaining. When I first became the owner, I did not write a vehicle off. CPA called me. He's like, why not? I'm like, well, I don't need a new truck, so I'm not writing it off. Eventually, I did need a new vehicle, and one broke, so I did. Okay, that was the first thing of I actually need the vehicle. This is not just a tax game. I'm not spending, money just to save 60 cents or 40 cents on the dollar. I still spent $1, right? So I'm out 60 cents. I'd rather still have the money. But then the thing that tripped me up was the expenses. I got a call from CPA filing returns. Wes, I haven't seen a single auto expense all year. What are you doing? I'm like, honestly, I've been swiping the same credit card for gas for the last 10 years. I just forgot. So, you go to the car wash, go get the vehicle repaired, you get new tires on it. If it's owned by the business, it needs to be paid for by the business. The auto insurance needs to be through the business. So all of that needs to get paid for and accounted for.
No, that makes sense. Is there a certain, you think the IRS, when they look at a vehicle, is there a certain dollar amount they look at, or is it just, hey, is this out of the ordinary?
It's going to be back to documentation and was this ordinary and necessary? Kind of just like we talk about with travel and meals, just because it's nice doesn't mean it's necessarily out of the ordinary or necessary, but there's always a line in the sand. I like to use the smirk test. I had one of my clients one year, he called me up and said, hey, my CPA is not letting me write off this vehicle. I was like, that's odd because he called me a week ago and told me he wanted me to write off a vehicle. So I called him up and I said, hey, is there something up here? I knew him. So there's something going on here. And he said, did he tell you what type of car? And I was like, well, no. What type of car is he trying to write off? He goes, a Rolls Royce. And I was like, well, okay, let me call him back. He is clearly in the wrong here. We are not writing off a Rolls Royce through a dental practice. I mean, you can, but that's passing a comfort level. You go buy a Range Rover, and yes, it's a very nice vehicle. is it necessarily an out of the ordinary vehicle that I see people driving? No, you see Range Rovers all over the place. Right now, how many dang Rolls Royces do you see each day? Like, give me a break. You're taking a $400,000 tax deduction on a Rolls Royce.
Yeah.
Probably not the world's smartest move.
Plus, we always joke, it's like, you better not be rolling up to the office in a Rolls Royce because your patients, I don't think they're going to take that well.
No, definitely. And, hey, maybe you have too long of a commute and this doesn't work. You can always use the standard mileage reimbursement rate. You can also still put the vehicle through. It'll lower use percentage. You're just going to disqualify yourself from some of those extra tax write-offs, but you still will be able to get what we call the actual expense method, where, hey, if, you're 20% business mileage, well, you can write off 20% of your actual expenses towards the vehicle. The other 80 will need to be considered personal income. Now, the huge deal, it's not as beneficial. We want to try to get more beneficial than that. But you can do all these things. Now, the one thing we forgot to mention here is, in order to write off the entire vehicle, it's the gross vehicle weight rating. It needs to be 6,000 pounds or more. The vehicle does not need to weigh 6,000 pounds or more. It needs to have a gross vehicle weight rating of 6,000 pounds or more. Now, all of the car dealerships know that business owners are looking for this big tax deduction. So, if you Google the car you're trying to buy, GVWR, if it's over 6,000 pounds, it's going to pop up first search item, right? If it's not, it's probably going to be a little bit harder to find. And if you find a model that floats in between, where some of the trim levels are 5,900, some are 6,100, usually if you open up the driver's side door of that particular vehicle, the gross vehicle weight rating will be on the sticker inside the door. So that's how you're going to make sure that you're over 6,000 pounds. You can still write off a vehicle under 6,000 pounds gross vehicle weight rating. It's just going to fall under a different depreciation schedule, not nearly as favorable. You're not going to qualify for 179. So not nearly as favorable. And then this no longer matters because bonus depreciation is back at 100%. But any vehicle with a cargo area of 6 feet or more in length that is not accessible from the cab or from the actual area you sit in qualifies for 100% write-off under Section 179. So, Mario, I know you're in a hurry. I think you're going to buy one of those white cargo vans, right? And you're going to fence it up. That's ideally not what we're using this for. That's probably more of what it's meant for.
Show up in a Mercedes Sprinter van.
But if you're buying a pickup truck and the bed is 6 feet or longer, it qualifies 100% under Section 179. That used to be a bit more of a big deal. These days, it doesn't matter because it's just which section of the tax code you take the write-off in.
Perfect. Any other big things we should know about deducting vehicles, Wes?
No, this is probably the closest to the truth of the bad social media advice. Now, I assume most of those people giving the advice are not actually telling you, hey, these are the steps you need to take and things you need to do to document this.
Yeah.
If you just write off the vehicle and you have no documentation and you get audited, you're going to be in hot water.